Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm HealthBiz Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare entrepreneurs about their lives and careers. If you like this episode, I hope that you will subscribe and that you'll ask your friends to do the same. My guest today is Srulik Dvorsky. He is co-founder and CEO of TailorMed. Our episode today is going to focus on how Srulik's own experience helping family members through their medical journeys inspired him to start a company focused on removing financial barriers for patients. Srulik, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Excited to join you today.
Outstanding. Well, it's always good to stay grounded, and I like your maps behind you, so I'll know where everything is. We can jump from topic to topic. But speaking of maps and so on, what was your childhood like?
Yeah, so I am an Israeli, born and raised. Just recently relocated to New York with my family, just slightly over 2 months ago. I think childhood was in the town that I still lived in until about 2 months ago, a town called Kfar Saba, which is like slightly north of Tel Aviv. And um, I think three things that I fondly remember from my childhood is like the passion around technology, which I do today, but also around music. I played saxophone from when I was, I think, 9 until
Nice.
about 19. Played jazz saxophone and also some sports like volleyball. But I would say my two biggest passions are and were technology and music. And I had like defining moment, like a pivotal moment when I was 18. I got to the army band. We have mandatory service in Israel, so I had to join the IDF. But I also got to the technology, like division of the intelligence corps, and I had to make a choice. And the reason that we're speaking here today in a healthcare technologies podcast and not a jazz podcast is because I chose technology.
Now that sounds good. Well, my son plays the saxophone too, but I don't know which way he's going to go. He's 17, so he might have a defining moment soon, or maybe not.
I know. I have friends who now live here, close by in New York, who play with me and still do. And every time I go to one of their gigs and their shows, it kind of, makes me wonder. But I'm passionate about what we do here as well. So I'm glad I had a choice between two good things.
Sounds good. So then, after the IDF, what did you do after that?
So I started my technology career at the IDF. I was 17 and a half, and I was fortunate to be given the opportunity to start doing hardware design. And this is what I did for electro-optic systems for about 3.5 years. And then I spent some time in a company called Applied Materials, not in healthcare, but a great company. And then I started my bachelor degree in electrical engineering. It was definitely, an experience, toughest thing I had to deal with until that point. And I also was fortunate to join a small startup in the medical device space in my freshman year there. My army commander joined that startup, asked me to come to I think it was a 50-hour QA gig that turned out to be 9.5 years of my life. And I
Nice.
started my journey at Brainsgate, which was that medical device company I started there.
So if you're in the IDF, but then you're released, and if your commander asks you to do something, is it a request or is it an order?
It's interesting that you asked that because even in the army, although obviously you have orders, where I was, it wasn't as like directed and like order oriented. It was we were encouraged to challenge authority and we were encouraged to make our own decisions, which I think really influenced like not only how I eventually got to do what I do now, but like a lot of like IDF alumni and especially of the units that I was part of are leaders and entrepreneurs today. When Guri, who was my team leader and then my R&D leader in that company, asked, it was just like a natural continuation of what we've done together before.
I think when people who are come from military background, they just sometimes chafe at people who haven't been in the military and say, it's not this like complete top-down structure. And I know that's certainly true in the IDF and the units that you were involved with. But it's still he probably has an outsized influence compared to an average person asking you if you want to join something. So
Yeah.
I think it's true. Well, good. So then, so what did you get out of Brainsgate in terms of what did you learn sort of coming away from that experience?
I think Brainsgate gave me so much across a few areas that I'm so fortunate to have the opportunity to work there. So I started there as a student, and you know, from when I was there as a student to my last day in the company, and even after that, staying as an advisor for a couple of years. What I liked about Brainsgate more than anything else is what the company was about and why we are there as a team working for one shared goal, which was to develop a new modality for treatment of ischemic stroke. And I honestly couldn't care less if I was doing QA for software, designing a new neurostimulation chip, or doing cadaver studies, which I did quite a lot because I was super passionate about that. And in hindsight, I think that what happened there for me, and also in the IDF, is that I found what kind of motivates me more than anything else, which is purpose. And I think there is a term that I definitely didn't invent, which is purpose-driven innovation, and that's really what I like to do. But I think that I like the first few year in Brainsgate, we were in the R&D solely. So eventually, I became the R&D leader there. But I got a chance from my ex CEO to actually also lead the operation team. And a lot of friends ask me, why would someone who is in engineering going to now manage manufacturing and technical support and clean rooms? And I think it was one of the smartest decision I had, because it was not only dealing with designs of new things, but actually the execution of what happens next. And I got really into operations and processes and quality control. And I was also wearing like the quality manager hat of the company. So I think I had the opportunity to learn so many different facets of how to take an idea and eventually, through a very complicated FDA PMA process, almost get to market, because I left the company when it was still in its last pivotal trial. But it was an amazing experience, and I also had like great leaders to learn from there.
Well, great. So, interesting journey from that point. Saxophone, IDF, engineering, stroke. Well, TaylorMed. Now, where did that come from? What was the inspiration to start that company?
Yeah, so unfortunately, stroke wasn't the only diagnosis I was exposed to during that time in Brainsgate. So my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer while I was working there, and unfortunately, a few other family members, actually six in total, were all diagnosed with different complicated conditions, mostly in the oncology space, in a very short period of time. And I think that uh, it was a natural thing for me to do, but maybe because of like my background and who I am, I assumed a very active caregiver position of all of those complex conditions that our family went through, to the point that it became a very big part of my life, without necessarily wanting it. And then after 9.5 years at Brainsgate, decided that I wanted to do something new. And it wasn't like I was that, you know, child entrepreneur who was always sure he's going to form his own venture, but there was a passion that kind of grew inside of me to do something in that field. And I took about a year off to try and figure out what is a big enough problem that I'm passionate about, but also spend a lot of time thinking, what are those market dynamics and potential business model that can support that venture. And that got me closer and closer to the US healthcare system because of the size of the market, but also closer to the intersection of healthcare and finance. It was easier, it's not easy, but it was easier to kind of pressure test some of the business models and the ideas that I had, which eventually kind of led me to focus more and more around like removal of financial barriers to care.
Interesting. So what's the kind of the overall concept? So you're talking about sort of removing financial barriers to care. Why? How does that turn into a company? It's certainly in the U.S. and elsewhere a common observation that there's financial barriers to care. Things are expensive, but what do you do about it? Some people come at it from the policy standpoint. So this is obviously something different.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, all of those initiatives are needed. I think that there is a core fundamental problem in the way the U.S. healthcare system is built, and that is challenging first and foremost patients and their families to be able to get the care they need, in a in an affordable way and improve their access. But in order to really change how things are happening, you need to have technology come into play. You need policy. You need all stakeholders and constituents to kind of coming together. And I'll tell you the TaylorMed story in a second. We are trying to do that not only as a software company, but building a network that will come together to try and solve for affordability. But taking a step back, you ask, what are the drivers here? It starts with the patient. It started personally for me as a caregiver for patients, but it starts with patients seeing rising out of pocket responsibilities for everything they consume out of healthcare, whether it's simple prescription drugs to complex procedures. And while patients are the ones suffering the most, don't get me wrong, this is also challenging the system in different areas. And whether it's the provider who is, trying to prescribe a drug, and their organization, whether it's a small clinic or a large IDN, trying to collect the revenues for that drug that was dispensed, but patients don't have the ability to pay, or if it's a pharmacy that is, dispensing those drugs and is seeing an increasing rate of prescription abandonment. And I think what really resonated with me and continues to excite me about what we're doing is that we're not only solving something that patients will be caring for and will be impacted by, but also we have a way to really impact customers that are joining our network, because we're improving their financial performance. And definitely nowadays it is a crucial factor, more than before. And we're helping them not only provide a better experience for their patients, but also improve their financial metrics, whether it's through the reduction of their costs and definitely through the increase of their collection of revenues.
Got it. So I saw on your website there's a few offerings that you talk about: financial navigation, financial insights, and then on the pharmacy side. How do those break down? How do you think about them?
At the end of the day, what the system does at its core is that we are able to ingest data from every IT resource, whether it's an EHR, a pharmacy operating system, a revenue cycle system, or a CRM. And then we are analyzing that data to do a few things. One, we are identifying patients that have a financial need, and that's based on projecting their out of pocket expenses on a patient specific basis. Secondly, we are trying to figure out what resources of assistance are available for that specific patient, and we have thousands of those programs in our database that is maintained in real time. And every time we match a patient with that program, we can then facilitate the enrollment to that program, whether completely automatically. We have manufacturer relationships and what we call express enroll to those programs, or just automate a few of the very manual steps that are required. So that's kind of the core capabilities of the platform. And then it depends on who is the user. So traditionally, our users will be medication assistant specialists on the pharmacy team, pharmacy technicians, and definitely financial navigators who are more, you will see them in specific service line like an infusion center and a cancer center. And those users will be going into our system to find the patients that need help and then match them to programs and capture those potential savings for the patient and for their organization. So financial navigation is the term, and that's kind of the name of the core product. Insights is the layer on top that provides the analytics about how many opportunities were we able to identify and how much did the team capture. So metrics like financial returns, productivity analysis, demographic distribution of patients receiving that assistance. Then we also have two other products, one related to the ordering of free drugs, which is a very tedious manual process that we help them support. And the fourth one is fund management, that some providers and other organizations will have their own internal hardship funds that we help them manage as part of one unified platform.
Got it. So a lot of what you're describing sounds like it relates to pharmacy, specialty pharmacy, infusion, and so on. Is it mostly in that area, or is it a broader perspective that you have?
So while we started back in the day in specific service line and specialty more than anything else, I think that we do still see more need in specialty areas because of the nature of the cost of those drugs. But our system supports all conditions and all drug types.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is there is a trend of more specialty drugs being dispensed in retail pharmacies,
Hmm.
and then we must support that in every use case. So whether it's a home infusion pharmacy or it's a specialty or retail pharmacy, The drugs that address specialty conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and cancer are things that everybody knows that are challenging patients, and there are opportunities to solve for through financial assistance. But thinking about a patient that has a cardiovascular condition that needs to take a chronic med that costs them a few dozen bucks a month, that is something that is really challenging patients to be able to adhere to that care. And patients with inhalers for their COPD diagnosis are also part of what we consider patients who are struggling financially to adhere to their treatment. So we are there across all conditions in every use case that is related to those medications.
Now, I know you built up a lot of this yourself, but I saw there was also an acquisition relatively recently. I think some focused on some of the pharmacy pieces. Can you just sort of describe how that fits in and how that's gone?
Absolutely. So I think one of our goals in the last couple of years, and definitely in the next years to come, is continue expanding our network and our reach to be able to support more patients. And we've built some of it, as you said, on our own, what is called organically. But we also collaborated with Viver, which is a company that was kind of competing with us in this space. But we found a great match between our teams and our visions, and we acquired Viver at the end of last year. That acquisition doubled our network overnight with a very broad range of IDNs that were Viver's partners and are now TaylorMeds. The reach to more specialty pharmacies and pharma manufacturers were also obtained through that acquisition. And more than anything else, we have a great team now that is part of the TaylorMed family. And the Viver team has been awesome, like everything that they touch. So we are super happy about that decision a year ago.
Help me understand a little bit better, sort of the users, the customers. I understand you're mentioning IDNs and a network. What does a network mean, in this context? And then how does it add up for everybody? In other words, you have programs, a lot of them provided presumably by the pharma manufacturers. Is it beneficial to the manufacturers that the patients are in these programs? How do the IDNs benefit? How does the whole thing kind of work?
So it starts with the patients. And the patients are the most important, let's call it quote unquote, nodes of the network. So patients can get their medication in their provider office, whether it's a small clinic or a large IDN, or and they can go to a CVS or a Walgreens or a Walmart and get that in a retail pharmacy. So for us, the network should be how do we reach as many patients and as many prescriptions that we can, and then be that single source of truth to all of the funding that is available for them. Some of that funding is through manufacturers, some are foundations, some are state and federal government subsidies, and all of those will be routed through one source that is TaylorMed. And in those cases, the users will vary. So if we are working in a specialty pharmacy, it can be a team that they have dedicated to that financial assistance function. If we are working with a cancer center, they can have financial navigators that will do that and meet with patients face to face. It can sometimes be our own team that is offering that as an hybrid or an outsourcing service to augment existing staff and take more of the opportunity and capture it together. And last but not least, it can and should be patients. And that's something that we are working on to make sure that patients can take a better and more active role in their medical journey and find patients assistance programs, enroll to those, and take advantage of that on their own. And not every patient can, but I think that we're seeing that there is more and more tech savviness across patients, and they want to be better informed. And that's kind of the one side of the network: patients, providers, and pharmacies. But the sources of that funding are the other side of that network. And you mentioned manufacturers. I think that's one of the biggest contributors to financial assistance and copay assistance programs, whether by foundations or by the manufacturers themselves, are programs we are connecting to automatically to support a differentiated experience for the patients, their providers, and definitely also to the program sponsors. And this is why manufacturers would like to collaborate with us, because they say we are able to, shorten the time patients get on care, shorten the time it takes them to enroll to those programs, through the financial assistance that the manufacturers provide, they can stay on their therapy without seeing, adherence challenges. And that's the reason that they are investing in those programs, because they're supporting patients to stay on care, and that's like the business driver for them to continue supporting those programs. But I think it's also interesting to think about, you have a patient, you were able to provide assistance, you really made a, provided a value. There could be more that you can now do. You can help them with education. You can help them enroll into adherence programs. And I think that that's part of the strategy thinking forward that we will be helping our manufacturers, partners to do.
Yeah, I'm interested in what the insurance companies, the payers, feel about some of these things. So let's really take copay assistance for a minute. So on the one hand, copay assistance is useful because certainly for the patient, they can pay for their medication, they can continue to have it, and so on. But some of those copays are also put in place as a mechanism, not just to save the plan money, but also to encourage the use of, say, one tier versus another tier. And some of the programs by the manufacturers maybe are sort of undoing some of those incentives. On the other hand, you're talking about education, adherence, and so on. How do all those things balance out?
It's complicated. I think that there are different interests that are coming into play here, and not everybody is always aligned. So, if I'm a payer, I want my members to, stay on their care as long as it's, at the end of the day, providing better outcomes and reducing total cost of care for me as a payer. And in a lot of conditions, having the patients adhere to their meds have been, proven that that's, necessary. So if you have a patient with insulin for their diabetes, or with anticoagulation drugs for whatever conditions they have, having that patient adhere to their care is not only helping the patient, but definitely helping the insurance plan have a member that is eventually staying healthier. I think there are multiple complexities when it comes to copay assistance, and we have heard a lot about copay accumulators and copay maximizer programs. And those are challenging because at the end of the day, the patient is confused. They don't know what is the best course of action for them to get on the therapy that their provider prescribed. And what we're doing is we're trying to align everything to the best interest of the patient. So we are only starting our analysis after a prescriber has already decided on a treatment plan. So we are not, exposing different ways or different drugs that can be more or less cost efficient. And then when you go into like cost benefit ratios, it's not always the patients. There are multiple other factors there. But since we only start our process for looking for financial assistance once the provider decided on a course of treatment, I think we have the best interest of the patient in front of us. And then if we can offer something that will alleviate a huge bill, I think it's definitely something that we think is ethical and the right thing to do.
How do you think about where you are with the company now? Obviously, you've made a lot of progress. You had the acquisition, but it's a great big country and healthcare economy, and sort of the new problems arise as fast as you can get rid of the old ones. Where are you in terms of the company's evolution and in terms of realizing your overall vision?
I think, looking back, you asked me about starting this company and why. 5 years ago, if you'd tell me that we were to be deployed across so many organizations and touching millions of scripts a month, I would say that's a notable goal, but let's start small and see that we get there. I think that I'm so proud of our team to be able to get us to where we are today, but it still feels day one. It still feels that there are so many patients and hospitals, clinics, and pharmacies who are not necessarily taking advantage of financial assistance programs and different other mechanisms to address the financial barriers that are related to the care delivery, that I think that are, our next few years are going to look very similar to what we have today. First and foremost, connecting as many patients to our network and really making an impact, increasing the utilization of programs that are out there and available for patients to benefit from. But I think there is something that will be built on top of that, because once you have such a large network, that can serve more needs for those patients and other constituents that are participating in the network. And we're excited about those strategic initiatives that we are now starting to explore.
So changing the subject a little bit, security and privacy are big issues throughout the economy and throughout healthcare in particular. I mean, as we're recording this now, there's some high profile incidents that are underway at U.S. hospitals and other parts of the healthcare system, and you place a lot of emphasis on both of those, security and privacy. What are the main issues from your standpoint, and how do you go about addressing them?
I think it's a critical topic, and thanks for asking about that. I think you asked before, what did I learn in Brainsgate? And obviously, we were dealing with a neurostimulation acute implantable device, so safety was first. But for me, it really kind of built the culture that we started here in TaylorMed from day -1, I would say, of making sure that privacy and security are number one priority. And the reason for that is at the beginning, having a security incident is something that can kill this dream of helping patients from the very beginning. And now that you are responsible for, processing so much sensitive data, you have to have not only the processes in place and the technical safeguard in place, you have to build a culture from the ground up of employees and partners who are waking up and understanding that that's part of what they have to think about. And I think that we were so far successful in doing that. I think we have a great, security officer that is, embodies that vision, Eric. And at the end of the day, we are putting all of the technical safeguards. We are SOC 2 compliant. We are passing all of the audits with flying colors, but it can be as simple as an email that someone clicks on that is a ransomware, or it can be sending PHI over an unsecured channel. So that at the end of the day is the you know most problematic thing to do, because it's an n of one mistake. So continuing to have constant training, we are doing like mock simulation of phishing attacks, and just making sure that there is an openness culture of reporting everything that someone might have done, without fearing that there will be any retribution. Just making sure that we're constantly closing every gap in our system is core to what the team is doing. And we need to do more. The threats are just increasing, but I think it's crucial.
Yeah, it's a very good point on culture. I think that's usually the biggest differentiator on security once you're doing things like, SOC 2. The phishing one is an interesting thing in terms of the training, because the on the one hand, it's great to train people to avoid clicking on something they shouldn't. On the other hand, you can say, well, the technical measure should mean so that if somebody clicks, you're not going to take the company down. And you can also have a culture of blame if you do too much training, then people might be scared to click it. So it's good that if you can actually pair those two things and really do those sort of from the ground up. And obviously,
Yeah, it's multi-layered. You have to address all types of safeguards, and you need to make sure that the team knows why we are doing that, because it slows down things like working in healthcare, whether it's because of privacy and security or whether it's because of regulation on the medical device and pharmaceutical side. It slows down innovation, but it's necessary. It is to protect, the data or the health of the beneficiaries of technology.
changing back again and thinking about how you started the company and what your experience was and your upbringing and so on. I have to ask, is there a need for this company anywhere in the world other than the United States?
Short answer is absolutely yes, or unfortunately, absolutely yes. A bit longer answer is the needs in developing countries and even in like more modern economies is there, and I think that we are seeing gaps in access to care across the globe. I think the markets are really, really different, and the market dynamics and the stakeholders and how authorization of new drugs are introduced in different governments will determine what is the appropriate solution for that. So I think that the U.S. healthcare system is very complex, and the ability to build something that will serve as many constituents within the system in a win-win-win situation is not easy to do, but thankfully we're able to do that so far. Thinking about other markets, I think it won't necessarily look the same. So it's not that in every country there is a high out-of-pocket responsibility that the patient can finance through a copay assistance card. but there are so many cases where someone needs treatment and they are unable to access it, either because they can't drive to a distant hospital or simply because it is not covered by the Ministry of Health, that I definitely think that like our future will reach other regions in the world as well. But we have so much to do here before we do that, so it's a matter of focus as a young company as well.
Makes sense. A final question is whether you have any time for reading, and if you have any books you might recommend to the audience.
Um, I wish I had more, but I definitely try and take advantage of either ebooks or reading over weekends and vacations. I actually just started reading a book for the second time, and the book is The Exponential Organization by Salim Ismail. So, a friend of mine recommended reading the book in 2016 when I was thinking about starting a company, and he gave me that book, and he said, "Read it now, but read it again in a few years after you have hopefully a company, and reflect back on that." And I think that I'm now starting to understand why. So just for those of you who don't know the book, that's a book that was written by Salim Ismail, who is the former head of innovation at Yahoo and the founder of Silicon Valley Innovation Hub Singularity University. And it speaks about what makes companies reach exponential growth. And it starts with something that really resonated with me, which is to have the massive transformative purpose, what they call MTP, which is not like a mission statement, but it's something that explains why you do what you do, why do you get up in the morning to do that, and eventually something that is aspirational enough that like continues to push the boundaries of what the company is trying to achieve. And for us, it took me some time to realize that that's our NTP, but it's the removal of financial barriers to care. And I think that it started in cancer in 2018, it expanded to all conditions in 2020, and it expanded now to every type of medication encounter. But as you said, whether it's medication affordability or just affordability, or whether it's in the US or globally, that's our aspirational mission, I would say. And I think that reading the book now again definitely kind of takes me back to the early days of starting the company. There is still more to do, but I definitely recommend it.
Well, it sounds like a good friend and somebody who would give some pretty good advice. So I want to say, Srulik Dvorsky, co-founder and CEO of TaylorMed, thank you for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Thank you so much. It was great speaking with David, and looking forward to staying in touch.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.